These are the countries with the most missing children. These are the countries with the most missing children. Pay close attention and check where your country appears on this list, because sometimes we scroll past headlines like this without really thinking, but the numbers are terrifying. Countries with the most missing children: Italy, 21,951 missing children each year. South Korea, 25,690 to missing children each year. Russia, 45,000 missing children each year. Canada, 45,288 missing children each year. India, 96,000 missing children each year. Germany, 100,000 missing children each year. United Kingdom, 112,035 missing children each year. United States, 460,000 missing children each year, with 2,300 children going missing every day. What do you think is actually causing all these disappearances? Are these kids running away? Or is something far more disturbing happening behind the scenes? Are they being kidnapped? Are they being trafficked? Are there secret groups operating in the shadows, using these children for things the world doesn't want to talk about? Why do so many cases never get solved? Why do some countries have higher numbers than others? And most importantly, why aren't we seeing global outrage on the same level as other issues?
I joined the Freemasons at the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom, located in London, when I turned 30. My only reason for joining was finding out what my father knew, and hopefully a lot more, by progressing through the ranks as quickly as possible. My aim was to ultimately join a very specific chapter, the Knights Templar. With just 2 years to go before I became the Worshipful Master, I decided to leave. I returned a few years later for a brief spell, simply because my youngest son was desperate to join. Sam was initiated into the Lodge of Lucullus, and at the time was the youngest Freemason in the UK. It wasn't until the pandemic that I really started to climb down the rabbit hole. With a lot of time on my hands and in the knowledge that I wasn't going to be back to work for at least 9 months, I discovered and then spent literally days on BitChute and on YouTube watching Joe Rogan. After a bit of digging, I discovered there had been a reset in 1776. And I discovered that this was to see the destruction and removal from the pages of history, the Tartarian Empire. The more I looked into this reset, the more often I would see the names Max Igan and John Levi appear. I then started to search offline too, and to my surprise found several books on eBay and in second-hand shops that actually mentioned a place called Tartaria. Fast forward 4 years and I'd built a modest library. In fact, some of the books I have contain maps that shouldn't exist, with races of people and flags and religions too I'd never seen before. So armed with this information, I made some podcasts, then started a group on Facebook, and quickly learned I wasn't alone. In fact, thousands of people across the world had been researching the very same thing. So to help others understand what's happening right now and to serve as a warning in the hope we can prevent another reset, I decided to put pen to paper. The more backwards in history we go, the more advanced civilizations actually seem to be. Almost 250 years ago, just before the Great Flood of 1802, there was a great reset. This plunged humanity back into the Stone Age, concealing all of the knowledge possessed at the time. This knowledge is considered today to be pseudoscience or occultist, and is linked to an empire you might not have heard of, the Tartarian Empire. Some researchers and historians propose that the Dark Ages never actually happened, and that credit has been given to the Greeks and Romans for many of the magnificent buildings we see today, therefore removing any trace of the Tartarian people. I highly recommend reading Anatoly Fomenko's book called The Issue with Chronology. However, it is the first of 22 books he wrote on this subject, so you might need a lot of free time. Isaac Newton also researched the alternative timeline during the last years of his life, but his book The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended was discounted by mainstream historians. The basis of their work is that there have been phantom events, dynasties and people, often repeated throughout historical narratives. They claim that this was done by Scaligerian chronologists, such as Joseph Gallagher. Gallagher was a Jesuit, identical to the asylums and prisons with that Greco-Roman style architecture. The Oddfellows took control of the orphans in the heavily populated city of New York in 1853 and created their very own educational system. The greatest showman in the world, P.T. Barnum, was given the task of how to distribute these children across the country. Barnum then conspired with Charles Loring Brace to start placing out these children using the railway networks, which sent them to the Midwest in what's known as the orphan train movement. Given an identification number similar to a passport, children were bought, sold and auctioned off into slavery. They then went to work on farms, inside the mills, mines and as chimney sweeps too, ultimately replacing the Tartarian and Moorish adults that had been killed off, living in extreme poverty or committed to the newly established asylums. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were transported by train from New York and Philadelphia. At the same time, Britain was actually exporting children to Canada, with numbers estimated to be over 100,000. In addition to this, a further 150,000 Aboriginal and Native Canadian children were sent to orphanages and foundling homes too. Italy received 425,000 infants from Great Tartaria between 1852 and 1860, and there are estimates that the children born just in the year 1875 alone, 93,000 of them were abandoned by their parents in France. However, as shocking as these figures are, nowhere has such a huge number of orphan children as Russia, the former capital of the Tartarian Empire. By 1920, this country had approximately 7 million children living on the streets or in abject poverty. Foundling homes in St. Petersburg and Moscow began to receive 10,500 children a year from across the Tartarian Empire. When you search for the term Cabbage Patch Babies online, you will often see repopulation and cloning too.
A lot of the buildings underground, about mud floods and all of this. And it was a fascinating documentary put together, which really challenges your version of history that we've been told. And of course, none of us were actually there because we're only of a certain age. However, evidence is out there, and Guy Anderson, my guest, has been doing a lot of research and is writing a book called Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids.
In regards to the missing children, just contemplating how it's interesting how at one time there was all these Cabbage Patch children, and there was the orphan trains and things like that, genetics experiments, and all these children appeared during the 1700s. And now here we are. They used those children to repopulate the planet, to help with a reset. So now here we are, and all these children are missing. What is that, 400 and over 450,000? In this video are 460,000 children. And that's the largest number is in America. Where are these children going? Where are these children being sent to? Are they going to underground cities? Are they a part of the reset? Are they using the genetics and being used for experiments? Is it just the adrenochrome and the sex trafficking? Are they shipping them to underground cities and repopulating, areas where the children don't know anything already and getting started on that? What is happening to these children? But I think the mass amounts of these children compared to the mass amount of children that just appeared in this 1700s is really interesting. The amount of children disappearing now versus the amount of children that appeared in the 1700s. There's just something there that rang my consciousness, is knocking at the windows of my mind, like, hey, you're missing something, or I want you to see something. I need you to contemplate this. This, my body remembers somehow. This is important. Much love to you and yours. This is Siren Buddha Medicine, your life coach. Life Path 1111. I'm out. I remember hearing somewhere in my research about how the earth kept account of people, that the consciousness of the planet accounts for its people, and that if there weren't, that there's a certain number of each race on the planet that has to be accounted for, like a perfect balance of the different nations or people, or something bad would happen, basically, like an implosion. And if what we're looking at is macro, micro perspective of everything, and we're actually looking at duplicates of the macro, then that would be equivalent or parallel to how the body works, you know, with its systems and how we actually work in real life as people and consciously. So the fact that there should be a certain number of people on the planet to account for it, just like there has to be a certain number of things within your body's systems, you know, like so many chromosomes, you know, and there's a perfect pH balance, you know, there's a number for that and things like that.